and not. We have a minute, but we still have to switch servers. Like we're not fucking paying StreamYard prices.
Yeah, no, fuck StreamYard. Sorry, StreamYard, if for some reason you're watching this YouTube video, which I'm sure you're not, but fuck yourself. Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined by brave, bold Brian Marceau.
It's really nice to be back off the shelf. We've had the flu running through the Marceau family for the last week, which would be why I was not here last time. But anyway, dudes. Wait, no, I was here last time.
That was 2 weeks ago.
That was 2 weeks ago. Yeah, whatever. Okay, I'm done talking about the health. We've been sick. The end. Show. Okay, Ron, good to see you. But dude, it's basketball season. Episodes are always weird because there's always like 4 things going on at once. Like last week we had the fantastic volleyball news, but this week like we get actual fantastic news to piggyback onto some pretty good basketball stuff. So the basketball season episodes are kind of grab bags, and I guess we're grabbing the bag.
Speaking of grabbing the bag, producer redacted Martin Heemstra not here tonight again, just getting the golden showers from work right now. So without further ado, we have to pause the show.
I absolutely love Ron's comment alluding to our intro talk from the StreamYard to the barnyard. Let's talk Idaho football. Okay, Ron, you're today's MVP. Thank you.
Yeah, StreamYard has come under my my angry gaze, but without,
we can pull the curtain back. They like quintupled their price, and there's other stuff that's better. So like, hey, we're gonna change. No one cares, because what we see is not what you see when we record the end.
Yep. Yeah, it shouldn't affect anything other than our graphics package might look a little bit different, but we're gonna find a new platform which
is central to the show, right?
Yeah, I mean it really is.
We are nothing without our production.
Speaking of production, it is amateur hour. So without producer Martin here, Brian and I are going to attempt to play a pre-recorded video from Martin. We're going to see how well this works. I've struggled through this in the past. Hopefully not going to struggle through it here. But Brian, once I get this to actually register on my computer, there we go. I'm going to click hit, and then it's going to play, and then we're going to talk about it. So without further ado, Martin's Magical Minutes.
Say his name and he appears. Thank you, Dallas, for that loving intro, or Brian, whomever it was that was talking. I also don't know what's happening right now because the recording for StreamYard says at 25 seconds, and I just hit recording about 10 seconds ago. All right. Talking about the women's basketball games again, like last week, these two games were two completely different games, starting out with the Weber State game. They played really well, kind of controlled the tempo from start to finish. Idaho won 77-62 against Weber State, and then in the other game, which we'll talk about a little later today, they won they lost Idaho State, sadly, 52-44. Going back to the Weber State game for a second, Olivia Nelson had a career high in points, scoring 30. And Jennifer Adlin had another double-double, scoring 14 points, 11 rebounds. And just really felt like a typical Idaho game that we're all used to. Scoring quickly and playing great defense for the most part. Weber State only had 8 people, so their bench was pretty, I don't want to say pretty thin for the most part, but they really were. A lot of their players were playing a lot. Their 8 players they had were all playing a lot of minutes. So it really kind of, you could tell by the end of the game they were getting a little tired, and Idaho kind of pulled away in that game. I'm kind of repeating myself for this one. For the Idaho State one, they shot 44% from the field, just a little over 40% from threes, which is all things considered, I think pretty good for where they were. Compared to Saturday's game, which we'll talk about in just a second. They held Weber State to just under 30% from the field at 29.7, 25% from three. In this game, they really really controlled. I know I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry. Work's been a little meh for me recently, but they all kind of controlled everything and really, really showed. This was like the typical Idaho game that we all kind of know. That we've all been used to. And really kind of showed why they were a top 3 team in this conference, and probably should be. The next game, which talk about now, it was a stinker. No other way to put it. It was ugly. It was not pretty. It was, as Patty kind of told me before the game, Idaho State was very scrappy, and man, they are the scrappiest team I've seen Idaho play this year. Yeah, it was, like I said, it was not pretty. Idaho for this game. It was the worst shooting game I've seen Idaho play this year, and probably quite a few years as well. They shot 20%. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, they shot 20% from field, 20% from three, and they shot under 80% from the free throw line, which is, I know it's the charity stride, but still that is not good at all. For overall, it was just kind of not. They were just kind of shooting. It seemed like at some points they were kind of shooting to get out of that funk, and it never really felt like they could get out of that funk. In this game, in the Idaho State game, Olivia Nelson was held to only 14 points, 4 for 14 from the field. It was like she didn't. I think all her points were scored in the second half, and it just was not a pretty game. It was not good at all. Nobody was shooting shots. When Idaho State went on a run, it was never too big of a run, but still, you kind of always thought Idaho would come back, and it never. Idaho would kind of put small runs together to get them down to maybe 4, but then Idaho State would stop Idaho from shooting again, and it just was not. it was not a good shooting off. It was not a good day not a good game at all. The next couple games for Idaho are all on the road. They play at Portland State this Thursday at 7 p.m. in Portland State. They play Saturday with, I think, their last time in the Beehive Warehouse on this Saturday at 1 p.m. So some winnable games, but as I think I said last week, I thought that Idaho should win against Weber State and Idaho State. Who knows in the Big Sky? I know Weber State just knocked off Eastern Washington, and Eastern Washington had been doing pretty well recently. So I'm not going to make any of those kind of conclusions given what's coming, given what happened this past weekend. But still a lot to look forward to. I know they can kind of hopefully get things rolling in the right direction, back on that right track while they head up. Well, they have some big games coming up against big games coming up towards the end of the season as they get ready for Big Sky Conference play in Big Sky Conference tournament play in Boise this March. And yeah, that is all I have. Brian and Dallas, back to you.
Go Vandals.
Thank you, Martin. Love the sign out. Thank you for including Patty, friend of the program / permanent member of the program, with the way that we use that exit video. Brian, going over the women's team, just hitting a little bit of the recap from Martin there. Idaho still third in the conference behind. I mean, that Montana State team is a wagon. They're 20-2 undefeated in conference. That's a damn good team. Northern Arizona,
Montana State, and their NCAA net rating is actually within a reasonable discussion of if they lose in the Big Sky Conference tournament, should Montana State get an at-large bid? And the answer is probably. So that's the level of a Big Sky team theoretically getting an at-large bid. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, we've essentially in the last 30 years, that has not even been a 1-second discussion on the men's side. So that's the context for Montana State women. They're pretty damn good.
Yeah, pretty damn good. And then Northern Arizona, who we've seen Idaho play once before and got boat raced. Unfortunately, those are the two cream of the crop schools. But a nice big win over Weber State. They're unfortunately recovering from their own almost Clausian era. Their previous head coach left for a better job. The person they replaced her with got to double-digit victories once in her 5 years. So that program cratered. Colby Peterson has not been on talking about them specifically, but has mentioned it before on the Weber State Weekly shows. That program's turning it around. Really nice for Idaho to pick up the win there. But, man, that Idaho State game, 2 different quarters scoring under double digits in the third quarter specifically. They shot 3 for 19, 1 for 9 from 3. Like, just a bad night, Brian. It's not to immediately lead into your Saturday discussion, because I know you're going to talk about both of the men's games, but Idaho State basketball has just not been going our way for quite a while.
Well, and I just want to comment on how weird that ISU result is for the women. One, it was a home game. But 2, just if you're paying attention to the women's team and you're looking for an outlier games as far as what the Idaho women are doing, putting the ball in the basket, it's Montana State. That was a 3-point loss to a very good Montana State team earlier this year at the start of conference play. That the next sub 60 scoring night is Idaho State, where we covered, they scored 52. But Idaho State's they're not even that good of a defensive team in Big Sky play alone. They're actually the number 3 overall scoring team. And as far as with field goal percentage, they're not fantastic. They're slightly better. They're the 4th worst. But it was just a rough outing for the women. Whatever. I'm glad you talked standings, because we can talk about the conference tournament as far as the women are concerned here, because it's a different picture of the women than the men.
Mm-hmm.
The Big Sky Conference as a whole, women's basketball, it's pretty much 1 and 2. Montana State, NAU, I think it's fair to say they've separated themselves. Idaho is 7 and 3 as the number 3 team. They're kind of a tier on their own. Teams 4 through 9 in the conference are essentially the same team. It's like teams whose conference record splits 500 to 2 games under 500. 3-7, 5-5. That's teams 4 through 9. So Idaho certainly has some breathing room. We just don't want Idaho to throw away that breathing room. One, to change we don't want it. If I'm talking about how I know that Idaho got killed by NAU in the home matchup, but talking conference play, I'd probably rather that Idaho's on the same side of the bracket as NAU than Montana State, because I would love Montana State to have a few chances to screw up and lose to give Idaho a better chance. That's it's just how I think that's the best gamble you'd say. But then just as far as momentum heading into the conference tournament, obviously you don't want to throw away some losses that could hurt team momentum, whatever. But the women's team, they're doing well. They're at the point where they reasonably should be holding serve against pretty much all but the NAUs and Montana States, and they were tough against Montana State early. We'll see how that shakes out, but good first season for Moira for sure. And
Fantastic.
just want to shout out Olivia Nelson in Big Sky play, number 3 score in the conference, 17.9 points per game. We call that a big deal.
Yeah, looking at their schedule, Brian, Martin mentioned the games at Portland State and Sac State this weekend. Portland State, worst team in the conference, so should probably be a win there.
Whoa.
Sorry, top 5 Portland State.
Thank you.
Apologies. Top 5 Portland State, who is technically top 11 in the Big Sky, top 10 even in the Big Sky. If there were 11 teams, they'd be 11th though. That team's terrible, so Idaho should pick up a win there. Sac State and Eastern, again, those are just those teams sitting there in that pool of trash. And then you do have NAU and Montana State as 2 of your 3 remaining home games. So you've got a chance to maybe sneak up on NAU there, but they've got the game in hand already and a couple games on the standings. Idaho looking pretty good for that 3 seed. But like you said, Brian, would love to see Montana State on the other side of the bracket and maybe set up an upset in the championship game, because don't really want to see that team before that if we don't have to. So, Brian, I think that's it for women's basketball talk. Anything else before we shift over to the men?
No, I'm good.
Easy enough. So, Brian, you are our men's basketball aficionado. Idaho split the series last week on the road, 1-1, with a win at Weber State to start the week off.
Yeah. So, hey, the Vandals sit at 10-13 now, 5-5 in Big Sky play, and hey, we'll hit some bullet points from the games. But the big takeaway for me for this team, and you kind of saw it in. I know the score of Idaho State beats Idaho on Saturday, 87-71. 16-17 sounds like a big loss. That was a way worse loss than 16-17 points. That felt like a 37-point loss while watching. Coming off of a big 82-74 road win in Ogden. And I bring that up because to me and to a lot of people who are following Vandal basketball, like, hey, we've said 1,000 times, it's been 6 years, even last year. Idaho has 10 wins this year. They won 11 games last year. There's virtually no way that Pribble doesn't take a step above that 11 wins this season. It'd be just a complete catastrophe if he did not. And I'm not worried about it at all. But I bring that up because this team at times, especially in the in our Discord chat during the games, which is still lively, guys. Patreon.com/Tubs-the-Club. Join the best place to talk Vandal sports online. Sometimes watching this team, it can feel like you don't know what to think of this Vandal team, because you have games like beating Weber 82-74 and then getting killed by Idaho State, who, by the way, Idaho State's right around 500-ish too. You have previous weeks where Idaho steals a win from Northern Colorado, then throws a win away against Northern Arizona. And that's just the reality of being around a 500 basketball team. You're typically hot cold, and hey, Idaho's perimeter oriented. Those teams they tend to run a little hot cold, right? And if you catch another team like Idaho State, and I bring this up because it was demoralizing to lose to Idaho State. Idaho State was way more physical than Idaho, and credit to Coach Ryan Looney. Idaho State has radically adjusted what they do offensively. It's completely different from like his last 5 or 6 years. Yeah. So, hey, there's other good coaches in the Big Sky. Credit in Idaho State. Looney's doing what he needs to, which is what you want coaches to do, right? That's why we like Jason Eck. That's why we like Tom. We believe in Thomas Ford. But shifting back to Idaho State's around 500, and they just murder Idaho. Like, hey, we all know matchups matter, but simultaneously, when 500 teams play each other, like the home road matchup really matters. And second, if you catch a team like Idaho State on a good night, while a team like Idaho has a down night, you can look like you're outclassed. And Idaho did look outclassed in Pocatello. Were they? No, I don't think so. The big issue is there's some defensive issues for Idaho against Idaho State that, I mean, the Bengals shot 16 to 26 from 3. Really hard to beat teams when they shoot like that. Now, Dallas, you might be saying, well, I mean, hey, sometimes teams just hit everything, can't do anything, right, Marceau? Well, yeah, correct, except that wasn't the issue with Idaho State. Idaho State was shooting wide open threes. And college players shooting wide open threes, those are essentially 70% shots if those are wings.
Yeah, they shot almost 80% in the second half from 3, Brian. That was just eyes closed, wide open shots.
Yeah. That was the issue for Idaho. And also, I mean, to be honest, the rhythm of that game, Idaho looked great the first 12-ish minutes, I felt. Idaho against Idaho State corrected some of the issues that we've talked about on the show. We've certainly talked about in the Discord of being too willing to shoot threes without putting pressure on the defense. Idaho was not doing that early in the first half. But those last 5 to 7 minutes of the first half, Idaho State found a second gear, and Idaho did not step up to the challenge. They took a step back and became more passive. And Idaho State, they essentially played with what you'd call the proverbial killer instinct the rest of the game. Like they could tell Idaho was not ready for physicality. The refs were allowing physicality, whether you like it or not. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm kind of mixed of, I like when guys get to play, but if you have guards like Colton Mitchell gets fouled a lot. And there are times where like the physicality is clearly a problem for him. But like, to me, the problem's not that he's too small. The problem is he was being fouled and they didn't call it. But Idaho didn't really, they were not ready for the challenge of what Idaho State brought. Some of that's a matchup issue. Some of that is, hey, Idaho State's point guard Dylan Darling, he's the leading scorer in the Big Sky. He killed Idaho 28 points. He came from Washington State after playing high school at Central Valley. He's a great guy. Kind of wish Idaho would have got him. I'm happy with Idaho's roster, but when we've talked about, hey, Idaho's a player away, that's a guy that I mean. And if Idaho could have had a guy like that who can create offense on the wing, we're talking about a different team. But shifting back to the main point, though I was pretty frustrated with the end result against Idaho State, I think pretty much everyone who's watching Idaho, they understand that, be pissed during the game, but relax afterward. This is 500. This is 500 basketball, guys. And there have been many years in football we would have killed for 500 football. This is half a decade we would have killed for this in basketball. You're going to have some great nights. You're going to have some rough nights. What does that mean? You take away from the team. It means this is just who they are. This Idaho team offensively is a couple players away. They're not strong enough defensively, and I think part of that's youth. This is a younger team overall, but part of that is just not having a ton of size. Now, lots of Big Sky teams don't have a lot of size, so that's not that big a difference. But just kind of the overall athleticism of this team. It's not the type of athleticism that you'd associate with defense. It's a little bit more. I mean, look, Idaho plays a fast-paced the way they do. They score well from the perimeter the way they do because that's essentially the type of athlete that Pribble has. So other takeaways just from the weekend, Tyler Russ was huge in the win over Weber State, scored 21 points. He'd had a few consecutive rough games. And Russ, credit to Russ, he responded to a few rough games from the perimeter the way you want. He attacked the basket a lot more, took more of his threes as catch and shoot opportunities where it was drive and kick, where the ball enters 3-point line, then comes out. So Russ had a big game against Weber State. Against also Tyler Linhart, double digits both games after, I said I thought it was a mistake that he didn't play in the second half against NAU, but hey, back Tyler Linhart, back to his, double digits off the bench. That's a big deal. And Christian Gonzalez had been in a really, really long dry spell. And that dry spell persisted through Friday. Gonzalez did not shoot well at all against Weber, going 2 of 8, but he picked up 10 points at the free throw line, scored 14 points. Part of that was being aggressive. Part of that was fouls at the end of the game. But one of the things that you'll sometimes want a scorer to do if the outside shots aren't falling is, one, try to score through penetration. He wasn't able to do that in the last 5 games. The other is, can you get the guy at the free throw line? And Gonzalez got the free throw line a ton against Weber. Did that translate to something being a little bit different against Idaho State? Yeah. Christian Gonzalez against Idaho State was one of the big bright spots. Went 5 of 10 for 16 points. That was his first game shooting over 50% in honestly around 3 weeks. And if Gonzalez can if he can be scoring that, 12 to 15 points a game, this Idaho team has a different ceiling. So those are something like the broad strokes takeaways. Tom Kendall in the comment section saying Brickner needs to break out some, talking about Isaiah Brickner. Yeah, I mean, Tom, you're right. Tyler Linhart and Isaiah Brickner are kind of they're the bench spark plugs. If someone's going to score off the bench, it's one of those two. Kyson Rose at times. And hey, Kyson Rose, he had some moments. I mean, he only took 1 shot against Idaho State. But Kyson Rose scored 9 against Weber. So no, he's a guy who can score off the bench too. But the basic point, Brickner and Linhart are the big bench spark plugs, and Idaho typically needs at least one of them to step up if they're going to be competitive and win games. Yeah. Totally agree. This week, Idaho's got Portland State, Sac State on the menu. And so what's my view here? Portland State kind of beat the shit out of Idaho early in Portland, top 5 Portland State. If you're talking Big Sky standings, Portland State's number 3 in conference, sitting at 5-4. Idaho is actually crazy to think Idaho is in discussion for a top 5 seed. Now, one discussion, I don't like that there's 5 seeds, or that there's 5. There's the amount of first round bias that exists. Not a huge fan, but that's the world we live in right now. So Idaho they're in discussion right now for getting into that 5th seed. So this is a winnable game. Portland State is kind of a rough matchup for Idaho, but also Idaho was down a couple guys for injuries and health last time in Portland. And as we talked about, if Idaho State and Portland are at around the same overall level, Portland State's 13-9, Idaho's 10-13. So yeah, they're inverse. They're not that far away. I mean, I think there's ways where this is a winnable game. The big deal is Idaho needs to not. Portland State likes to put pressure on offenses. They play aggressively on defense much more than a lot of teams in the league. Idaho just needs to not oblige by shooting threes without getting the ball inside the 3-point line. That's the big deal. The other template for Idaho winning games is always who are going to be the 3 or 4 guys who step up a little bit, because we don't have Dylan Darling on this team who's going to score 29 and carry the team for most nights. Sacramento State's a must-win. Sacramento State is the unequivocally worst team in the conference. They sit at 6-16. They've got 2 wins in conference, 2-7. So that's a must-win for Idaho. Sac State essentially has one dude that you're paying attention to at all as far as being able to put the ball in the basket. And I love that the Big Sky Conference page is terrible and is not letting me see this. Jacob Holt averages 15.3 points a game. He's the big guy to pay attention to. He's the post. He's a rough matchup for Idaho. He scored 35 in Sacramento, but that didn't matter because no one else contributed. So if you're following Idaho this week, which you should, Portland State, I think that's a toss-up. I mean, if you were gambling, you'd probably pick Portland State based off the physical matchup and just based off how the last game went. But I mean, to me, there's intrigue in this game here. If Idaho can ever pick up 2 wins in a row on one of these trips, that's actually a pretty big deal for Idaho cementing their spot in the top 5. Now, Dallas, you might be thinking, well, 500 teams split games a lot, don't they? Yeah, correct. That's what I'm saying. If Idaho can just do that once, that's actually a pretty big deal to give them some breathing room. Because if you look through the conference, most of this conference is right around 500. I mean, I know I said Sac State's the worst team in the league, but between Portland State and Eastern, we have 8 teams that are somewhere between 5-4 and 3-7. That's not that much gap between the top and bottom of the conference, which is a way of saying pretty much everyone can beat anyone get on a given night. Also, like with given matchups. So anyway, pay attention this week. We're still obviously we're going to make a big deal when Pribble picks up win number 12 because it's record for him. But I guess I'm Dallas. I'll throw it to you for a second. You've been on the shelf. How many wins are you hoping to see out of Idaho this season?
I mean, Brian, if I'm being totally honest, I'd love to see 8 more wins and see the Vandals get to 18 and 13 and just magically fall into that number 3 seed. Because again, Northern Colorado and Montana have done a pretty good job of separating themselves above the pack. So would love to see Idaho run off an 8-game win streak into the Big Sky tournament. If I'm being totally honest in what I want, that's what I want to see. Do I think that's going to happen? No. But like you've mentioned, Brian, we're at this weird spot where there's 2 teams that have set themselves above, and realistically, with a good week or a really bad week, Idaho could find themselves anywhere from 3rd in the conference to 10th in the conference. So hopefully this mostly positive momentum continues. I think Idaho's probably going to keep doing the same thing of kind of just going 500 most of the rest of the way. But again, that's a huge improvement from what this team has been for the last half decade plus at this point. So realistically, yeah, you hope you get Portland State and Sac State 2 wins at home, get feeling good about going on the road to Eastern the next week, and then NAU and NOCO, and then you got Idaho State again, and who knows how that's going to go. But looking at this schedule, Brian, I unfortunately, I'm thinking Idaho probably goes 4-4, maybe 5-3 the rest of the way.
See, you just hit on it though. Like I think if they go 5-3, that's 15 wins. That'd be finishing 15 and 16, and then you see what happens during the conference tournament. If Idaho could get, it just feels like if Idaho could get to that number 15, that's probably a pretty big deal for this team. Well, if they're going to get to 15 before the conference tournament, that probably means they had at least one trip. They picked up 2 wins. This is the week to do that if Idaho's going to get there. And then just second, if they get to 15 wins, I know it's unlikely, but finishing at 500 is suddenly on the table if they win a couple during the conference tournament. Big if, right? But there's certain markers teams hit when they're turning things around. And hey, transfer portal era, things are a little bit different than they had been the previous forever that both of us paid attention to college sports. Like we know that. But to me, if Idaho could get to 500, the safest gamble would be they'll finish slightly below 500. But it feels like that in itself would be a pretty big deal for this team, because there is the next question Pribble has to answer as far as developing Idaho is not, can he coach a game in game? We know he can. He's doing pretty damn well overall. Like there's always stuff we bitch about with every coach, but extract your annoyance during a game, which is actually part of what's fun in the first place. There are no concerns about Alex Pribble running a basketball team. I feel like there's a lot of ways we know there's a lot of boxes he checks to let us know we got the right guy. The big box he needs to check for Idaho to take a next step is being able to recruit a couple home runs. And I just feel that getting this team around 500 would make getting that box checked, being able to say like, hey, yeah, we have a pretty arena and that's pretty cool. We're past the first 2 years. Terry threw those away. We're past the first 2 years where the arena itself is going to sell everything. It's got to be a combo of like, hey, like not only is this a pretty cool place to play, awesome arena, like I can be comfortable here as a player, but the belief that you can turn the team into something else, or that you can do something here that would get you to that next step, which is reality Big Sky basketball. And Idaho getting around 500, I think it would be a big deal in being able to sell bigger, more effective recruits that Pribble needs to land if Idaho's going to take that step to compete for a conference title.
Yeah, being around 500, and especially I think being able to say you've won a conference game for what feels like the first time in 15 years, that would be huge.
That's 7 years. Idaho has not won a conference game for 7 years. I know your point, but just for listeners, if you're curious, it's not that 15 years is not that much hyperbole. Yeah,
it's like we're rounding into the halfway point there, Brian. I'm on board with you. I do think there is more juice to be had out of the recruiting fruit, but we just this is a rebuild, guys. We've been talking about it for years. Like the program that Paul Petrino left Jason Eck was stocked with talent and honestly pretty poorly coached on the field. You couldn't say anything about the previous regime of Vandal basketball, and it sucks, but that's reality. That's what Pribble had to come in with, and that's why here talking about year 2 maybe going 500, that feels like a huge success, and it does feel like a really good building block for moving forward to be able to say, hey, look at what Pribble did in his first 2 years here after a team that was lucky to win 8 games a season.
Well, and here's the other thing is, look, if Idaho gets around 500, this question is probably resolved. But Idaho has to get to a point where we're not saying, like, hey, Tom Kendall says this in the comment section, 500 veggies better, a lot better than 200 veggies. Well, yeah, like, and hey, Tom, no pushback. I've experienced what I've experienced as teams. It's a lot more fun to watch, right? But if, as far as developing the program, they got to get past the point of, hey, this is good compared to a catastrophe for half a decade. Hey, 500 is better than losing 80% of your games. You're right. But Vandal basketball has actually not been that successful of a program as a whole. They've won the Big Sky Conference or any conference they've been in once in the last like 33 years. I actually went to the conference tournament in Moscow the 1 year, and it was like 92, I think, or 91, 92, right around there, when Idaho won their last conference championship. Did not make the NCAA tournament. Getting past 500 is actually a bigger deal for this program than the football team, I believe. But the Vandals, I think the curse of the Kloss era is obviously how far back that was set. But for Pribble to take that next step, Idaho's got to get past the point of we're all comparing to garbage. We need to look at Idaho and be like, no, dude, they are just a fun team at the end, which I think that's what they are. But as a credibility marker, yeah, getting to 500, it's just different to be able to sell yourself as, no, dude, we were a pretty solid team. Not compared to this. We were just pretty solid. We were just a step away.
Which, again, feels like we are on the precipice of that happening. And again, the work's still got to be done and the players have to be found. But there is positive progress here. And Brian, we are getting, again, it feels like baby steps some days, but we are getting steps closer to being so far away from that, hopefully, that it is, hey, Idaho's not being compared to this complete garbage disaster dumpster fire anymore. Brian, I think that does it for basketball talk. We are over halfway through this show. Any final thoughts before we take a trip down the Salmon River?
No, dude, I'm good. I mean, it's an all-inclusive trip, so all I have to do is show up and sit down.
I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is if you're looking for a great all-inclusive vacation, Hughes River's right here in your backyard. They're Vandal owned and operated. They have been since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy, again, like I said, guys, multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. You could check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Brian, camp on pristine
bitches.
Oh. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs. And guys, the same thing I harp on every single week. If you like to fish, you're going to be able to fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire United States. Just bring your clothes and HRE will take care of everything else. Just grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now, 406-540-4450. Again, that's 406-540-4450. Or check them out at hughesriver.com. Brian, as we now transition into football talk, for anybody listening to this live, we are recording this the night before National Signing Day. For anybody listening to this as it comes to podcast services or days after it's come to podcast services or the YouTube replay or whatever, some of this is going to be a little bit dated. It just is what it is. We don't do this for the money. If we did, we'd both be homeless in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. this is a volunteer thing, guys. This is us spending our time. Unfortunately, this year we have not had the time to put into the signing day stuff like we have. Patty's no longer the Vandal student, so it's harder to get him around. When Martin's jammed up at work, I'm jammed up at work. Brian is doing his student/work. Like we're all doing so much different stuff across our lives that it sometimes just doesn't work out for us to push the show a couple days to be able to do a full national signing day. So what I want to say, if you go to govandals.com right now, you will be able to go click on the Vandal signing day section. There is a list of signees there. Again, this will be all finalized tomorrow. There might be a name or two that drop off or a name or two that add on. But for the most part, you can go on there right now and see the 20-ish guys that are being added to the roster. What we wanted to quickly touch on is there's, Brian, I believe you said there were 11 freshmen and 10 transfers. Guys, we're going to see more transfers this year, and I think that these transfers are going to play more. This is all, again, just shooting from the hip based on what we can decipher from this football program. But when you look at the roster that's coming back, offensively, you've got Eli Cummings and Nate Thomas and Art Williams, so you've got the running backs room mostly intact. Emerson Cortez Menovar is the top remaining receiver, and he didn't play a ton, but had okay stats. Jake Cox is coming back from a devastating season-ending knee injury, and then behind him it's going to be a bunch of fresh faces that haven't really seen the field. And then offensive line, Nate Azzopardi, Leighton Vining, Charlie Vleem, Keegan Henson, guys that got a bunch of playing time in the last few years. Those guys are all back. Nathan Knappich as well. I'm expecting to probably see him starting on the line. Line should be pretty fine. Then you get to the defense, and Brian, realistically, in the two deep, the guys that are left from the end of last year are Sam Brown, Zach Krotzer, Isaiah King, and Dylan Lane. Outside of that, this is going to be a completely different looking defense. There are certainly guys like Matthias McLean who had a couple moments here and there. There's a bunch of guys that have sprinkled in some time. Hayden John got some time at safety, but a lot of these guys, like the guys we've been seeing holding down the Vandal defense for the last couple of years, they're all gone. So this is going to look like a completely different team, which is why today, Brian, we're bringing up the new defensive coordinator, Court Dennison, and talking all about his journey to the Idaho Vandals. Brian, any thoughts on the signing day stuff before we, again, guys, we'll cover that more a little bit better next week when it's all official. Just timing didn't work out great for us this week.
Yeah, just be prepared on signing day. The 1 year roster is not done on signing day. Like there's more guys are going to come here, but we're beyond the bad news of the football offseason. It's all pretty much all good news. And second, be prepared. There's going to be a lot more transfers this year than in previous years with Eck. For one, Dallas hit the obvious reason, like on the defensive side of the ball, there's 4 dudes who are regular contributors, and obviously actually 3 because Dylan Lane wasn't playing by the end of the year. So there's a lot of snaps, even with development. There's a lot of snaps because not only do you want starters, you want depth. So young guys who are ready to step up, awesome, but we also want veterans to compete. That's the normal recipe lots of coaches have. Develop your own guys, and if they're in-house, they should be getting better with good coaching like they had under Eck, like they're going to keep getting under Ford. But bring in other guys to compete. This is football. The guys get hurt. There's a lot of snaps. This isn't basketball. There's 5 guys where 4 of them play like 80% of your minutes. We need depth. But then just second, we got, if you don't know, many of our listeners do, there's roster limits at the FBS now. And that has trickle-down effects to every single level of football. FBS rosters have to cut guys. FCS guys have already a lot of FCS guys who are going to transfer already entered the portal anyway. Mm-hmm. And like in Idaho, like a shocking number of Idaho transfers landed at some pretty good, FBS places. Well, they're taking roster spots that someone else can't take then, right? So It's a trickle-down effect. There's more FBS level transfers who are available for Idaho. There's more FCS transfers who maybe thought they had a home and don't, but who can still contribute them that are going to be here for Idaho. And at the D2 level, not that there's an army of guys who go D2 to FBS, but whatever number typically does, it's probably smaller this year. So there's more D2 guys. JCs have felt like a completely untapped market for a while. Ford has a lot of background recruiting. He coached at JCs. Everyone knows Thomas Ford can recruit, guys. I don't think we need to explain that any further, but you can expect the JC influence to probably be stronger for this cycle too, which is all to say at this moment, it looks like the signing day class is going to be about 50-50 between new freshmen and transfers. Different than the last 3 years, but probably what this team needs.
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned the junior college stuff. One of the guys I do want to quickly talk about, Will Cornelson, is a linebacker from Tyler Junior College. He was a finalist for the JUCO National Player of the Year last year as a linebacker. Had 21.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks. I think he had a pick six or a near pick six. Like it's guys like that getting an opportunity to, hey, the linebacking core has been decimated. You know, Jackson Eck and Zach Johnson are both moving on to bigger, quote unquote, better. You bring in a guy that was a huge success at junior college. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be the defensive player of the year for the Vandals, but I mean, the guy's proven he can play. He went to junior college and was a finalist for National Player of the Year. Like that is an untapped market that Idaho hasn't hit a whole lot recently. Petrino had some success with that early on and some failures with that early on. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, I would expect to see, we're going to see obviously faces that we just didn't expect to explode because we just haven't seen them very much. Like Marquand McCraney was a big recruit a couple years ago. Maybe he takes over as receiver number 1 or number 2 behind Cortez Menovar. Like, great. Or maybe somebody transfers in. Lanya Alexander Jr. from Montana State. Maybe he explodes in a passing offense. But the idea here being, Thomas Ford knew, I think, going in, you've got to bring in some guys that are experienced elsewhere, because it is tough to roll the dice on, hey, we are replacing virtually the entire defense with what is here. Man, you want to load more bullets in that gun. You want more cards in the deck. Like you gotta roll the dice with some guys that do have experience playing, because otherwise, what happens when let's go back to the quarterback situation last year, Brian. Jack Lane is the only guy with any experience. Jack Lane gets hurt in the first game, and then Idaho just blows through all of these freshman quarterbacks that probably realistically shouldn't have played last year. It would have been really nice to have had a Giovanni McCoy or Jabore Gibbs type of guy that is a senior or junior that's been around football for a while in college and can step in and kind of hold things steady, rather than throwing a bunch of freshmen in and hoping that they're going to work out.
Yeah, a different way to say it is, we know freshmen are going to play, and redshirt freshmen too. We know that. We've seen them do fine at the Big Sky level at Idaho. We've seen that do fine. We can't have freshmen be the insurance policy for freshmen. It's either the freshmen are awesome and they're ready to start, and the insurance policy is someone who's battle tested, who we know is going to be good enough, or this is the freshman becoming a depth piece that plays more and more. That's part of their development. We just can't. The quarterback example is perfect. It can't be freshmen are the insurance policy to freshmen.
So again, I love the way that this roster's coming together. We'll talk more signing day stuff and the actual official roster once it's official and as we move forward. But guys, we're going to get into it. Idaho's new defensive coordinator / linebackers coach, Court Dennison, one of the younger coaches in college football, actually, having just finished his college career in 2011. So yes, 15 years removed from his college career, but I mean, that means he's a guy in his mid-30s that is defensive coordinator of what I consider to still be a pretty top significant FCS program. Brian, I'm going to let you take the wheel, because I feel like I could ramble for 20 minutes. I don't want to put you on the shelf the rest of the show. So I'm going to let you take the wheel with Court Dennison and where you want to go, and then we'll free ball it from there.
Well, you talked about him being a younger coach, which you're correct, but his path to Idaho, let's just say it was not linear. You talked about he played at University of Washington. Dennison was a high and fast riser in the coaching industry. The reason this is such a big get to a lot of people is, hey, back in 2021, he's the co-defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach at Louisville, where they ran a 4.25, if that sounds familiar at all. Which, hey, for those wondering, that's P5. Dude was you already said he was young. Like 6 years ago, he was a co-defensive coordinator. That's the career track to being a FBS head coach for sure. That's a career track to being like a very well-respected P5 coordinator. Now, why is he at Idaho? Look, we're not going to hide this or anything. Like, he got in trouble. Yeah, he got in trouble for a consensual relationship with the number 3 staffer in Louisville's athletic department.
She was married. He was not.
Yep. It cost both of them their jobs for ethics-related concerns. Now, that's why he's at Idaho. Now, I guess I'm happy to have the dude here. Not happy when anyone has to like have their career trajectory flipped on its head. But if you get in trouble in an industry, the redemption story we want people to have is you deal with the accountability, and then you put your head back down and work, and you move your way back up. It's exactly what Court Dennison did after he had other stops before Louisville, but the big one on his resume is being a co-defensive coordinator at a Power 5 school before coming to a Big Sky school. After that, I mean, he did whatever he could to get back into college football. He got his feet completely back in as a UNLV volunteer analyst. And he's worked his way up since, went back. He did some coaching at University of Utah. Before last season, he was linebackers coach at Missouri State. And now he's back here. That's an example of a guy who went back to work, clearly didn't get in trouble, showing like, hey, that was a mistake. But if people make a mistake and they start doing the right thing, I'm cool with that. I'm more happy to have a guy who is very well respected in the coaching industry making a stop in the Big Sky, that any Big Sky school that had the chance to hire Court Dennison would hire him right away, unless you're Montana, because you don't give a shit about like important things like winning. Any school would love to have this guy as their DC. So I think it's in some way, it's a gift that Idaho has a guy at this level. You can talk more about scheme and background for Dennison, but the research I've done, talking to people, let's say close to the situation, is the players love Court Dennison. He seems like a very knowledgeable, very fiery, sharp guy, which is the kind of guy we want on this team. And he's got the background to recruit, the West, because he's from here, which that's background of the Ford. But having coached in the Midwest and South as well, that's more connective tissue in other places that can get guys into Idaho that maybe wouldn't be otherwise. So throwing it back to you to take it the direction you want. I think this is a home run hire.
Yeah, Brian, I think this is honestly, I think this is probably the most important hire that Thomas Ford has made. I think it's probably the best hire Thomas Ford has made. And it won't be shocking to me when, hopefully not next year, hopefully we get at least 2 years out of it, but it won't be shocking to me when we're talking about Court Dennison's replacement here. There's nothing that the guy has done on the field or around the field, or like in the weight room, like all the football centric places. There's nothing this guy has ever done that's walked the wrong way. His trajectory has been straight ahead until he got into some trouble with keeping your pants, dude. Like it's what it boils down to. There were some allegations there from the woman that was involved, and then they were pulled or withdrawn. So things got kind of messy and sloppy and hairy there. But again, it's a lesson learned. Hey, keep your work and your private life separate. But Brian, I'm going to do the really boring thing of I'm going to just run through his entire resume here because I find it extraordinarily fascinating. So Court Dennison was recruited to UW by Tyrone Willingham's staff. They were a 3-4 defense at the time, and technically an 0-12 team there. So Willingham gets fired after honestly one of the worst seasons I've ever seen from any football program. Steve Sarkisian comes in, former Vandal coach. Nick Holt is the defensive coordinator there. They move it from a 3-4 to a 4-3. They keep Dennison around. He gets a bunch of playing time his sophomore year. Then all of a sudden his junior year, he's I think third in the team in tackles. His senior year, he's the captain of the team, leads the team in tackles. And then he gets into coaching like right afterwards. He ends up as a GA at Louisville for Bobby Petrino. He's there for 4 years. He starts out in 2014 as just a defensive GA. Then in 2015, he gets moved to the director of on-campus recruiting because everything we've heard about this guy and everything that every coach, if you look up Court Dennison quotes, anything anybody says about the guy is he's a hell of a recruiter. Obviously, if he's got a background in being the director of on-campus recruiting. 2016, he moves into an actual, on-field coaching position. He becomes the recruiting coordinator and an assistant secondary coach. Then 2017, his final year of his first stint at Louisville, he's the inside linebackers coach and their co-special teams coordinator. The reason I wanted to hit this, Jair Alexander, a lot of folks probably don't necessarily recognize that name because I don't think there's a whole lot of crossover with NFL fans and Tubbs of the Club fans. But those of you who are NFL fans, Jair Alexander, when he's healthy, is maybe the best cornerback in the NFL. Court Dennison would have coached him in 2016 when he was a secondary coach. Then he goes on and becomes the special teams coordinator. Well, Russ Yeast, he played for the Rams, got drafted, has been in the league for 6 or 7 years at this point. Josh Harvey Clemens was a special teamer and defensive back at Louisville at the time. He's been in the NFL for quite a long time. So 3 different guys that all got drafted from those staffs. Yeah, there were Bobby Petrino teams that were constantly winning 8-9 games. But again, he's around some very successful programs and coaches. Todd Granton, the defensive coordinator there, ran a 3-4. So he was recruited into a 3-4. He plays in a 4-3, realistically plays in a 4-3 his whole career. Goes to Louisville where he's, again, helping out a guy in a 3-4. He leaves right before Bobby Petrino's era explodes. Like, Bobby Petrino went 2-10 in his final year. Everybody got fired. Fucking complete nuclear wasteland of Louisville football. He leaves right before that season to go be the outside linebackers coach at Oregon, where he's in a 3-4/3-3-5. Jim Leavitt had some weirdness, and it's right as things are really moving to realistically, you got to be 5 DBs almost at all times. So at there, he coaches Justin Hollins, who gets drafted in the 5th round, I believe, by the Broncos. He ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Rams a couple years ago. Jalen Jelks was a linebacker there who got drafted. So everywhere he's going, he's coaching guys that are making it to the NFL. And yeah, it's a little bit different when you're in the Power 4 or at the time Power 5, because those guys are certainly going to get drafted more than FCS guys do. But so this happens. He goes to Oregon. He's there. They win a bowl game. They have a really good season. Everybody gets fired at Louisville. He gets brought back as the co-defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach. He is brought in with Brian Brown to be co-defensive coordinator, and they run a 4-2-5 there. So he's now coached in a 3-4, was recruited in a 3-4, played in a 4-3, then went and coached in a 3-4, 3-3-5. Weird, just when realistically, when you have 3 down linemen, as you start getting into nickel packages and dime packages, like shit just gets weird because you're moving things around all the time. It is what it is. So he goes there. He's there for 3 seasons. Brian Brown, by the way, is now the defensive coordinator at Ole Miss. The guy has continued to go on and succeed elsewhere. Well, when he's there at Louisville, Yaya Diaby is a outside linebacker that is now a 3rd round pick by the Bucks, I think. A good contributing NFL pass rusher. Yasir Abdullah, Catrell Clark, a couple different defensive backs that played under Dennison or got their starts under Dennison that are now guys in the NFL. Like everywhere he's going, he's touching guys that are. Oh, that sounded rad. Brian, the eyes on that one is I'm saying Court Dennison's touching guys. That's boy. It is late night Tubbs, guys. We are at an hour mark because we're just flying through this stuff. So after he coaches these guys that go into the NFL, he gets in trouble. He ends up taking a year back. 2022, he's not really doing anything. 2023, he starts back up with Utah. He's a quality control coach. That's a 4-2-5 there. Kyle Whittingham has changed that defense a handful of different times, but realistically, it's been a 4-2-5 for quite a while now. Last year, he moves on to Missouri State. He becomes the inside linebackers coach. They run a 3-4 there. Taj Chambers becomes 2nd team all-conference in the MVFC. The 2 other linebackers got all-conference rewards from Stats Perform and FCS Football Central. That was a team that would have made the playoffs if they weren't moving to FBS and disqualified from it. Brian, like everywhere this guy has gone, he's been a winner. I mean, Coach Ford even says it in the press release about Court Dennison, that Dennison knows how to adjust his scheme to players, which is the big thing I'm looking for. He's never been a part of a losing season as a coach or a player. It's not technically true because his freshman year and sophomore year at UW were the 0-12 awful year, and then Steve Sarkisian's first year they went 5-7. But every single year after that, Brian, if he's been playing, they were winning. If he's been a coach, they've been winning. He hasn't coached a losing season in the 10 years he's been coaching. He has been around successful football. And my biggest thing that I know I've been leaving you on the shelf here. Coach Ford says he knows how to adjust his scheme to the players. We've seen that he's coached in all sorts of different like base schemes. The guy coaches with aggression and tenacity. That's kind of how he played. That's what I'm looking for here. When you're talking about there are 4 guys on the defense that are coming back as fairly big, quote unquote, contributors, and it's going to be just a free for all of who knows what we have out here. I want a guy who is very familiar with a bunch of different fronts and a guy who's been successful everywhere.
The other thing too is so Thomas Ford has been a head coach, is not the D1 level, but he's already got Matt Linehan, who we're happy to have, but this is Matt Linehan's first time calling plays as a D1 coach. I am happy to have a defensive coordinator who has some experience as well. And Ford's going to buffer that in different ways. He was a defensive coordinator as well as head coach elsewhere, but I'm just happy that side of the ball. The top defensive coach has some background too, but not just the fact of it being background for background's sake. It's that when we do research for things like the coaching episodes we did in the past, and look at in our Discord, we gave a ton of names of who the coaches were in advance of when they're actually announced. I just bring that up to say, like, in the research we do for that, we end up talking to a lot of people who are familiar, let's say, with the coaching industry. And I heard no one say anything when Court Dennison was hired, except the first one was, "Oh my God, how? Wow. And damn, this is probably an upgrade." And Dan Jackson just became the head coach at South Dakota State. So yeah, Dallas, you covered the background, you covered the scheme. I think the way that the coaching staff fits together, there's some boxes he checks, but it's not just boxes he checks that I care about the fit. It's that I honestly think that it's whenever you have coaching turnover at the level Idaho did, you always have the question of like, hey, like, well, who's going to be? Is this going to be a step up? Well, one, are we going to hold steady? But there's also, if you're concerned about holding steady, your actual concern is it going to get worse? I feel that on the defensive side of the ball, I feel better about our coaching staff this year. That's a big deal. So happy to have Court Dennison here. I think it's going to be a pretty big deal. And again, like in the coaching stuff, we talked to people pretty close to them, to the new coaches. Everything we've heard about players is they're ecstatic about working for Court Dennison. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he is such a huge get for Thomas Ford. It's just like, hey, we explained how the dude was available in the first place, but just such a big deal to land a guy like that when there's so much that Idaho has to change from the year before. You need to get some of the foundational stuff right. Yep. Just like Jason Eck did when he had to change over his staff, different situation, but he got some foundational stuff right. I think if you were to point to, I feel good about a ton of coaches, right? But if you were to point to a single one of Ford's hires to say, like, yep, that's the big one I think that we really needed, Ford is there because every coach needs good coordinators, but especially if you're going to hire a rookie OC, then I feel like you don't want to have the issue of inexperience at both coordinator positions where like the learning curve of the job itself may cost you games. So can teams deal with a rookie OC or rookie DC? Sure. Lots of teams do. I mean, Idaho essentially did with Schleisner. He had 1 year at North Dakota and then didn't get the job again for 8 years. That it doesn't usually mean you lost that position, then didn't get it back because you're lighting the world on fire, right? So, but that worked out fine for Idaho in the past. Not here to talk about that. We know Matt Linehan's a rookie. That's fine. Court Dennison answers a ton of questions for what Idaho's going to do next season.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we talked about it, Brian. I know we're well over the hour, so I'll make this quick. We talked about it a lot last season. The Idaho defense. I think more people were upset with it than I was because I saw what the plan was, which was play a shitload of cover 4 and don't let anybody beat you with huge plays, which is certainly a way to do things. A lot of things we mentioned were like Idaho really struggled to get off the field on third down sometimes. Like that bend don't break thing, it works really well, except when you need to get off the field, you have a tendency to let people move the ball and get those quote unquote empty calories. Sometimes they'd convert it into a touchdown, sometimes a field goal, other times they'd stall out at the 30 and it would be they'd miss a field goal or have to go for it. It wasn't the worst thing, but I don't think it's hyperbole to say that Dan Jackson, did a great job in his year here. Was a candidate for the SDSU head coaching job back when they gave it to Jimmy Rogers in the first place. But I think it's pretty safe to say that Rob Orich did a lot of the heavy lifting there for Dan Jackson, because there was a definite step back from the Rob Orich, especially the year 1 Rob Orich defense. But
after the 3rd or 4th week,
yeah, again, I would make the argument that's because around the 3rd or 4th week, Idaho made it pretty clear of we're not going to get aggressive defensively. We're just going to play sound coverage and hope the offense scores enough points to win, and the defense just isn't going to screw it up.
I have no pushback because 4 weeks is a third of the season, and it's not the other 2/3.
So when you look at what you're replacing that with, when you see the defense took a little bit of a step back, what are we going to do differently? There's a whole bunch of new pieces. You go get a guy who, again, the co-defensive coordinator he had in 2019 through 2021 is currently the co-defensive coordinator at a SEC school that was one bad loss away from making the college football playoff. I don't know how you can't say look at this and be like, yeah, so this guy was the co-defensive coordinator with Court Dennison and he is gone through the roof. I don't know how you can pitch this any other way than huge, massive win for Idaho, landing a guy that realistically, if he doesn't get into some off the field trouble with the affair thing, there's no way in hell that guy is coaching at Idaho. He's not coming back down to the FCS after 3 years as a co-defensive coordinator at a P4 school. Those guys don't end up at this level of football unless something happens off the field. Luckily, it wasn't something. I mean, it's bad, quote unquote. But the criminal charges and all the things that were thrown up about all of this huge thing, all of that was put away. Nothing happened other than she got fired, he got fired, her claims against him got thrown out, and here we are. A guy that probably shouldn't be at this level is going to be Idaho's defensive coordinator for at least the 2025 season.
Well, a different way of putting it, Dallas, is we're probably never going to we're not going to talk about the Louisville story again after this episode because it's irrelevant. It's relevant to explaining why Dennison got here, but it's irrelevant to everything afterward. So no, dude, I just think every Vandal has to learn that. But I'm going to be at the signing day event on Thursday. In Coeur d'Alene to hear more from Coach Thomas Ford, probably some other guys about some of the individual players who are coming this way. But dude, I mean, this unmitigated home run hire, huge deal for Idaho, and just another. You talked about the recruiting. This is just part of what I like about what Thomas Ford's doing is like, hey, he talked at his press conference, back about like, hey, some of the X stuff we're going to keep doing, obviously. But every team, every coach has to make every program his own. Mm-hmm. And there's just some ways where Ford feels like he is quintupling down on his strength, which is recruiting. Yeah. And to me, absolutely, yes, that's what I want. That's what I want. I know the guys can coach. We're going to see it on the field. But we talked about with basketball, they need a couple more guys. I feel like football, when they show up, the first question is not going to be like, hey, is there enough talent? No, it's going to be, how do we make this talent work together? How do we sort this to make it work?
Yeah. And if you can't figure out how to make it work, then you do what Ohio State did and just get more talent than everybody else. That way your dumbass coach can lead you right to a title because you've got more talent than anybody else. So I'm not saying our coach is a dumbass. I think very much the opposite of that. But hey, it worked for Ohio State. Idaho's not got $20 million in NIL money to throw around. But hey, you win with talent in college football. So Thomas Ford doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on let's get a bunch of recruiters in here and let's just make this the most talented team we can. Sign me up.
So there's been consternation in the comment section about is Brian frustrated or tired? I got my ass kicked by the flu the last week and I couldn't take any time off of school, guys. So that's what you're looking at. Not frustrated, just tired. That's it. Which is to say, we're at an hour and 10 minutes, Dallas. I need to pull the plug.
I was going to make a Terry Schiavo joke, but I won't. Shout out anybody that remembers that from 20 years ago. Brian, Tubbs After Dark, we are well past the, I don't know, whatever level of professionalism we had. So with that said, guys, we will be back next week to talk a little bit more about signing day, probably talk some more about the defensive coaches we haven't touched on.
Sorry. Thank you, Tom, in the comment section. Tom Kendall frustrated with Dallas's touch. That's a way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, it's the bad touch, Brian. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. With that said, guys, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.